Hello and welcome back to the next episode of my podcast, Dating Tips for Single Women. I'm your host, Antia, founder of FindTheOneElite.com. And today I have, as usual, a very special guest with me today that has a really nice topic to get to know better what happened with you in your childhood and how is that translating into your dating and your romantic relationships. So if that's something that you're stuck with, you definitely want to listen into this interview here today with Michelle Nagel. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Antia. How are you?
I'm really good. Good to have you. So Michelle Nagel is the author of Suffering is Optional, Step Out of Darkness into the Light. She has been a speaker and transformational trainer for over 30 years. Her latest success has been her program titled Women Who Roar Win, which empowers women who look like they've got it all together on the outside, but feel like a fraud on the inside. Isn't that the truth? And to take off their protective armor so that they can live a life of authenticity and just be who they really are. So with that, welcome, Michelle.
Thank you.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about how did you get into this work? How did you get to where you are today? What inspired you to get on this path?
Well, I was a child of an abusive family. My family was so incredibly dysfunctional. There was alcoholism and all forms of abuse. And I grew up believing that I was about a little lower than the worms because I had like no self-esteem or anything. And it was really challenging for me. So, but I kept having this feeling of like when somebody would tell me, say something negative to me and tell me that I was, really, really bad, I would have this little voice in the back of my head that would say, no, I'm not. And I think it was that little voice that saved me. It was my own internal belief about myself. And I did a lot of work. I started working on myself and all of the negative programming that I had received. And as I began working on it, I was so excited to see the changes in my own life that I started sharing them with other people. And as I said, I've been training people for about 30 years. I've been working with them. But I became a master herbalist. And I discovered that people who came to me always came to me because they gave up on the doctors or the doctors gave up on them. But they would come and they would learn all the traditional and historical uses of herbs, and they would go and do everything that they were supposed to do, but they still wouldn't get well. And the reason they wouldn't get well is because they had this mindset, this belief about themselves that would keep them ill. And so I went on to study more about emotions and how our emotions affect us. And it's amazing how something that happened to you when you were 3 years old can show up and totally hijack your life today. And especially with relationships. So if you are in a revolving door kind of relationship, is like you find a guy and you're really excited, you're really happy, and you really, really like him, and then things start to go south and you think, well, this is not the right one, I need another one. So you go get another one and you go through the whole thing. It starts out really good and then it deteriorates, and so you jump ship and you go find another one. The problem is that you're taking you into those relationships, and our own programming is what's hijacking us. So if we have an experience that makes us feel that we are threatened, and the partner doesn't feel that the world is a threatening place, then there's already a conflict there, and you have to protect yourself. So in 2000, there was a doctor at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego who was doing an obesity study. And he was trying to find out if there was a common thread between people who had obesity and why they couldn't seem to lose the weight. And as he studied this, he was very, very tired because he was just kind of running people through and asking them questions. He had this long list of questions that he was asking them. And he asked this woman, what he meant to ask her was, at what age did you become sexually active? But that's not what he asked her. Somehow he changed it and said, how old were you the first time you had sex? And she said 5. And the doctor's going, I didn't hear that right. That was not right. I didn't hear that. And so he asked her again, and she said very quietly with her head down, she said, I was 5 and it was my daddy. And so he said, he was horrified, and he said, I've got to find out what this is, if this is a common thread in people who become obese or have other kind of health issues and relationship issues. So they did this study. It eventually came to be called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or ACEs. And it was so important that the Center for Disease Control took it over. And so it's now known as the largest study in the world that nobody's heard about, because most people don't know about it. Even some of the doctors don't know about it. So what it is there are 10 questions in the original one that will ask you, did you have somebody who was verbally abusive to you in your home? Did you ever feel unsafe? Did you ever feel that you weren't going to get enough food? Did you ever feel that, or did you ever witness your mother being beaten up? And you answer those questions on a scale of either yes or no. If you answer no, it's a 0. If you answer yes, it's a 1. And if you, depending on how many of those that you have, that comes up as your score. So for example, my husband has a score of 1. He believes the world is a very safe place. I have a score of 9. I believe that the world is someplace that you have to be very, very wary of. And so sometimes when we get into these arguments, I will say, you don't understand. And the reality is he really doesn't understand, because he doesn't come from the same place that I do in the way that we look at the world. So a lot of times we don't think about that when we get into a relationship with somebody. And it's not one of the first things that you're going to do is, hi, I think you're cute. Would you take this test? It's not one of the things that we do, but it really is important if you're in a relationship with somebody to just kind of know where they are. When a person has been abused or suffered a tremendous trauma in their life, their brain develops differently than it does for somebody who looks at the world as a safe place. So if you've got trauma in your life, you think differently, you act differently, and that can really have a tremendous impact on you as to whether or not you're going to be able to maintain a relationship with somebody. Because every relationship, no matter how wonderful it is, has elements of conflict in it. And so it depends on how you handle conflict and how your partner handles conflict. If you can figure out a way to work it together, then that's wonderful. But having this understanding that you look at the world through different lenses, and it's a real and legitimate thing, can really help you in your relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that approach, and I never heard about the study either. So that's really, I'm sure the listeners are like, oh wow, let me write down that study. And because I love that you come from a research angle, right? And you just really like, here are the facts, right? And of course the researcher was meant to ask that question. It was like divine intervention, right? So somehow his higher self knew, okay, I need to ask the question differently, right? But it's so true, right? I've heard so many women who have like their self-esteem shattered in so many different fragments, really, where they're being fragmented, right?
Yes.
And that's, how can you have self-esteem if all the pieces are kind of like diverted in all kinds of different directions and you don't feel whole, right? So.
And one of the most important things that you do is instead of continuously looking for somebody else to fix you,
Yeah.
the only person that can fix you is you.
Yeah.
So you have to do the work. And I wish that I could say that it was easy and painless, but it isn't. But it is possible to have shortcuts, so you don't have to, go the whole long distance. And it's really, for me, I did the whole 9 yards. I did everything I was supposed to do. I went to the doctors. I got the antidepressants. I had such a severe reaction to the antidepressants that I darn near killed my husband. And the doctor said, "Oh, well, it's the medication is a little too high, but don't worry, because nothing would happen. You would never do anything that you wouldn't normally do." And I'm thinking, that's not true, because I read the papers too, and I listen to the news, and I know that the antidepressants can really cause people to do some horrific things.
Right.
So there are other ways to be able to work on yourself, to reprogram yourself. And they're really exciting ways to use energy therapies. There's no side effects from energy therapies. And those are really, I love using those and helping people to be able to get rid of that stuff by that.
Yeah, totally. So what would you say, what some of the, if a woman is listening right now, right, and she's identifying herself with having that challenge, what is some of the easy, so it's just like an easy tool or two that she can start to just kind of do the first, obviously there's deeper work, but what can she do to just get the ball rolling and start to have a different approach?
One of the most important things was taught to me by an elderly gentleman who was approximately 94 years old. And he's very quietly said, "None of us breathes deeply enough." And sometimes just taking a moment, instead of just reacting just like that, just take a moment and breathe. And if you're having a conflict with somebody else, you can just kind of step back and take a breath and say, "I wonder if they really meant to be offensive." A lot of us don't mean to be offensive.
Mm-hmm.
We don't communicate very well. I use all sorts of colloquialisms that I learned when I was growing up on the, one part of the planet, and somebody else learned something else. For example, East and West Coast. Some of the things we say don't translate well. So I may use something that, some term that somebody who is listening to me learned a different meaning for that term. My husband told me recently that a long time ago, I used to have a very violent vocabulary. And I'm thinking, I did? I don't remember talking like that, but apparently I did. And I'll give him that. That's possible. But apparently that was really a problem for him, that just my vocabulary, just the words that I used. And so we have to understand that maybe the person didn't really intend to offend us. Maybe they're really not picking a fight. So take a step back, take a breath, and if necessary, ask them. Say, even if it's, "Did you really mean to be a jerk?" Because maybe they didn't. And you got to be careful with that word too. Some people go up in flames if you use that word, but
yes, I just wanted to say, maybe not the best question to ask if you want to get an honest answer.
But you can say, "That really hurt my feelings. Is that what you intended to do?"
Yeah.
Which essentially translates to, "Did you mean to be a jerk?" But it's a nicer way to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I can relate to that too, because I come from an abusive household. My husband comes from an extremely loving household. So when I'm just frustrated, that to him is yelling. That to me is not even like that. That's not even, the first stage of yelling, right? I'm like, that's yelling to you? So it's really true. We're really acknowledging that you come from different points of view. And if you just said always peace and everybody's speaking softly, then if somebody's just passionate about something, that's already yelling, right? So
I had that same experience with one of my children.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I was being a little bit intense. I was not yelling because I grew up in a house where people screamed at each other.
Right.
So I was speaking firmly to him.
Yeah.
And he said, "You're yelling at me." And I said, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Show you what yelling is. So then I raised my voice to the yelling volume and I said, this is what it sounds like when somebody's yelling at you. And then I returned my voice back to where it had been. And I said, do you see the difference? And all the color had drained out of his face. And he said, now I understand the difference. Yes. But to him, the perception was still that I was yelling at him. And we have to honor other people's perceptions because their perception is their reality.
It's totally valid. Yeah, it's absolutely 100% valid, right? For their reality.
Yeah. So if you think somebody is yelling at you, then ask them, are you yelling at me?
Yeah.
And they may escalate the volume and say, no, this is what yelling is. Or they may say, no, I'm sorry. Does it sound like I am? And then you can begin to communicate about the nuances of how do you talk to me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Or when you have maybe somebody, I have a friend who she's half deaf on one ear. So she automatically speaks louder because she has to, because she doesn't hear herself. Like, so for her, it's really hard to, imagine. It's like when you have headphones in your ears and you speak to a person, but you don't realize, oops, you take it out and you're like, oh, that's a lot of volume. Right. Yes. So I love that. It's all about like assumptions, right? Like assume, make an ass of you and me.
Right.
What comes to mind when you share that, just and what's another easy tool? And I love the breathing too. Like I always remind myself of the breathing and I'm thinking, gosh, and I love that we talk about the breathing because I think so many women also don't breathe because, it's kind of like they don't want to take up that energetic space, right? They're like when I breathe, somebody will like notice the energetic change, or they might even hear me, and I just want to keep it kind of quiet. I don't want to rock the boat, right? So, what do you tell those women?
Okay, there's actually another way to calm down quite easily, and it's by using one of the tapping points for doing emotion freedom technique.
Mm-hmm.
There are 2 tapping points that you can use to calm yourself down. One of them is right here. It's called the karate chop point.
Karate chop, yes.
Just tap right there. And I do this sometimes if I'm in a meeting and I'm really like, somebody said something that I really don't agree with. So I kind of put my hands underneath my desk and I tap. And that helps me calm down because it's like we're like balloons, I guess, when you blow us up with air and then you can blow us up and we get really, really tight and really tight and you know what I meant.
Yes.
Intense.
Intense and uptight. The other one works too.
Tapping is kind of like letting the air out of the balloon. So just kind of doing that funny thing where it goes like that, just let some of the air out of the balloon, and it makes it so that we can kind of calm down again. So I use the one right there, but the one that really works best for me when I'm really uptight is the collarbone point. If people see me doing that at that point, it's like, I'm really upset. I don't care if you observe what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing for self-care. And my family knows enough now where they can look at me and they'll go, well, what's going on? Because they can tell, they know that this means that I'm really on the edge of something. So I just kind of tap, but it really works really well. There was a guy who cut me off in the car, and he not only cut me off, but he cut me off and flipped me off. Well, my car was about 5 times bigger than his was. I was driving a truck that had big, enormous tires on it. And I thought, I could just romp on this thing and run right over the top of your car. And that's exactly how angry I was, because I didn't deserve that. I had not done anything, it just jerked my chain the wrong way. And so I thought, well, this is kind of dangerous, actually. So I started, just hammering away down here on my collarbone. And, you don't have to tap really, really hard. I sometimes, if I'm really upset, I will. I've never yet bruised myself, though. I think we're pretty strong in this area, so you can probably go ahead and do that quite a lot. But it's amazing how it can help calm you down. And if you're in a conflict situation, especially if you're face to face with somebody and you're in that conflict situation, then just using something to calm yourself down,
Yeah.
so that you can be balanced is much more helpful.
Yeah, totally, right? Absolutely. Yeah, so very helpful, Michelle. So, yeah, so we're at the end of the show. So, for the listeners who's like, wow, this is really resonating with me. I really need to learn more tools. I need to go deeper. What is it that you have for them to continue to connect with you and go deeper?
If you go to my website, isoulshift.com, there is actually a link to the test. So you can get on there and you can take the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study test yourself and get your
Wow.
score. And that'll help you begin to understand, where am I on this scoreboard? Am I 0 or am I 10?
Right.
And anything under 4 is not too bad. Anything over 4, you're probably going to need some help. You need to be working on that, because you're going to end up with health issues, and you're going to end up with relationship issues, and you're going to end up with a really challenging life. So, because it's not necessary, suffering is optional. It would be really wonderful if everybody was able to navigate their life in a peaceful manner.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So it's isoulshift.com. And yeah, I mean, it is really true. So if you feel like you have, you're like, oh, I'm kind of thinking, I have a suspicion that something might have happened, like just hop over and take the test, so you can really see what's going on, and then how Michelle can support you, and like really taking the next steps for you to go to have healthier experiences in your dating and your romantic relationships, right? And all the other areas. But I know that this podcast is focused on dating, so that's why you guys are here, right? So, but oftentimes also the dating is not flowing quite so well, because there's also something health wise, right? Because usually when something is out of whack, it's usually out of whack in almost all the other areas as well. So just really, I invite you to take a look at that, and then go to isoulshift.com and check out Michelle's amazing work.
Thank you, Antia.
Thank you so much for being on the show today, Michelle. And again, my name is Antia Boyd. I'm the host of this wonderful podcast and founder of findtheoneelite.com. I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye.